Welcome, everybody. Thank you very much for joining this presentation today. My name is Andrei Strapkov, and I am a measurement expert at iGuide. It's a real estate technology company based in Waterloo, Ontario, that provides square footage measurements, floor plans, 3D tours. And so the topic of our conversation today is the new residential measurement standard that has been adopted by ITSO in Ontario. So our agenda basically consists of three parts. First, we will begin with some basic definitions and why this new residential measurement standard is important for the real estate market, for home buyers, sellers, agents, everybody. And then we actually will go through the 9 principles of RMS. And at the end, I will answer any of your questions. So feel free to ask any questions, ideally in Q&A section. So right after the presentation, I'll go through all of them and answer all of them. You can also ask them in the chat, but in the chat, it might be sometimes more difficult to find those questions you have. So first of all, let's begin with some basic definitions. What is ITSO? Probably all of you already know. It's Information Technology Systems Ontario. It's a non-for-profit MLS system and technology provider for 18 member associations in Ontario real estate market. So there are over 24,000 users who are part of Information Technology System of Ontario. And recently, ITSO introduced the so-called Residential Measurement Standard, RMS. This measurement standard has been adopted some time ago, quite a long time ago in Alberta, and has been used successfully. And now we have it here in Ontario. The only difference between the two standards is that in Alberta, you're actually obligated to use RMS when you report your square footage, when you report the square footage of a property. In Ontario, you are not obligated, but you are recommended to use this standard. And we will shortly, in a few minutes, we will look into why it's recommended. So, but it's not a requirement, it's just a recommendation. And RMS area is the sum of its above grade levels. So it's the sum of above grade levels of the property. And it can be applied only to residential properties, not to industrial properties or commercial properties. So we're not using RMS for anything outside of residential residential properties. So it consists of 9 principles. And the first principle of this residential measurement standard is just a preference for RMS. So whenever you report square footage, it is recommended that you choose RMS. And why? There are a few reasons. First of all, it gives you consistent results and comparability. So for example, if you are comparing a property in Kitchener to the property in Barrie, or let's say 2 different properties within the same city, you can actually easily compare these 2 properties. Because you know what's included, what's not included. You know that, for example, any basements would be excluded because both measurements follow the same standard. So you can easily compare 2 properties, one to another, and it gives you consistent results. And as a result of it, you get transparency. So it creates transparency in the market. It creates transparency for a home buyer. And it's important for home buyers, for sellers, and of course for landlords, tenants, and real estate agents. Another point here is that you probably know that there are quite a lot of buyers or sellers who, let's say, especially outside of North America, sometimes calculate square footage based on the price. So they actually calculate price as a per square foot. So for example, they might actually calculate that the properties in one market cost $900 per square foot, or in the other market it's 1,000 per square foot. So it's quite common outside of North America, and sometimes immigrants might apply the same approach here in Canada. And again, if you have a consistent square footage measurements, if you have accurate square footage measurements, it allows you to calculate this price per square foot. So it's very convenient approach and makes it easier for everybody. The second principle is pretty simple as well. So whenever you provide square footage or total area calculations, you should indicate if you are providing metric or imperial system. It's kind of part of transparency and consistency. So if you are providing square meters, make sure that you indicate that it's all in square meters. If you provide square feet, imperial system, make sure you indicate it on the listing or on the floor plan. Like you can see here, it's very hard to see here, but actually on the floor plan itself, there is a clear indication that it's in feet and inches. So it's imperial system. The next principle here is it basically tells us how to calculate interior square footage of a property. So the interior area, it's also known as finished area, living area, usable area, gross interior area, paint to paint. So there are many different names, but it basically signifies the same thing. And just give me 1 second. I think my cat needs to get out. Let me. Here we go. My apologies. So it basically signifies the same thing, and it's applied for attached property, for attached single-family houses that have a common wall with another property. So, for example, half duplexes, townhouses, apartments, they all would be using interior square footage. So it's the interior square footage is measured to the inside of the exterior wall. So you basically measure by the perimeter of the property from inside. It's also called paint to paint, kind of obvious, so that it's all measured from within the property. So you can actually see on this picture here that the areas covered in red are included in the calculation. So we do not include the walls if we're dealing with attached properties. So it's as simple as that. But here we go. So I think we stopped here at the exterior square footage, and so we can see that we apply it for detached properties, and we include the exterior wall in the calculations. This exterior square footage is also called gross floor area, gross living area, and it's measured to the outside of the exterior wall. So we can see that the interior square footage, it's called finished area, living area, usable area, and gross interior area, paint to paint. So it's something you use for attached properties like half duplexes, condos, or townhouses. And you can see that you do not include the wall in the calculation. So the area covered in red is included. These black wall, the walls indicated in black are not included, unlike with exterior square footage. As you can see, with exterior, you include the exterior wall. So you measure the interior perimeter and just not including the exterior walls. As simple as that. And when it comes to detached properties, it's very easy to measure the total square footage. So you basically, to measure the wall, you just need to measure the wall thickness. To measure the wall thickness, you just measure the walls at the window casings or door casings. And then you apply all these, and do the calculations. For example, if you're hiring a professional who can do the measurements for you, quite often photographers would provide this service, especially with iGuide. It's included as part of the service. They will just do the calculation themselves and provide you the measurements with the wall thickness or without wall thickness, depending on what kind of property you are dealing with. The next principle is principle 5. Include floor levels that are entirely above grade and exclude floor levels if any portion is below grade. So what it means is, obviously, basements cannot be included in the total square footage. However, this rule is actually a little bit tricky. Here is an example of what it looks like. So we can see here that the grade, so the grade means a ground. So we see that there is a slope. And obviously level 4, most of level 4 is below grade. So it cannot be included. It's indicated in gray. But level 3, it's only a piece, tiny piece of this floor, of this level, that it's actually below grade. And still, because this portion of this level is below grade, you cannot include it in the total square footage. However, what most of the people do is, so you calculate all the levels above grade and provide it as total square footage, and then separately you can provide a square footage for a basement for any below grade areas. That's commonly practiced. You just separate the two. You explain that, okay, this is the below grade, this is the actual square footage. That's it. And it doesn't actually matter if it's renovated or not. It can be fully renovated basement, but you cannot include it in a total square footage if it's below grade. Well, basement supposedly would be below grade. The next principle is principle 6. The property must have a minimum floor to ceiling height of 2.13 meters or 7 feet. So there are quite a lot of properties that have slope ceiling. And in this case, it all depends on the, so for example, as long as it's somewhere on this level, you have a floor to ceiling height 7 feet, but below 5 feet, you can still include it. But if there is a piece of the room that has a floor to ceiling level below 5 feet, you cannot include it. So it's easier to show than to say. I'll show you here. So here, this is a typical example. So you can see that the areas indicated like colored in the blue, they actually included. So for example, on this second floor, we see that at the top, it's definitely above 7 feet or 2.13 meters. Then there is a sloped ceiling, and here it gets to 1.1 meters or 5 feet. So this portion here can still be included. But once it gets below 5 feet, you cannot include these pieces of the room because it's below 5 feet now. So it's only this area that can be included. And it kind of makes sense as well, because these areas are not usable really, like they have very limited, at least use. So that's why they, according to the RMS standard, these areas would not be included. The next principle tells us about additional structures. There are quite a lot of additions to the main structure and conversions of above grade areas. And there are, for example, sometimes there is a renovated porch that's built on footings on a foundation, or a foundation converted to a year-round sunroom, with, or sometimes we have attached garages that are converted to a bedroom. So we have different situations, right? And there are certain rules that dictate whether you can or cannot include these types of properties. So the heating system is, so there are basically three main requirements. Number one, the heating system in this room should be able to heat the space to 22 degrees year round. So for example, during winter time, during fall, it still should be able to heat up to 22 degrees. Second, the structure should be permanent and should have a foundation of footings. Third, the structure or conversion is should be connected permanently to the main electrical service. So for example, when we're talking about attached garage converted to a bedroom, it can still be included in total square footage as long as it has, for example, permanent gas furnace, or for example, the renovated porch or sunroom can also be included as long as it has electric baseboard heating connected to the main electrical service. So you can include like spaces like you can see here, as long as they meet these three requirements. Next principle is about extensions from the main structure that can be included as long as they have a floor to ceiling height of at least 5 feet. for example, cantilevers, bay or bow windows, and dormers. So for example, this one can be tricky. So if we look here, so we see an example of a bay window, and it's 5 feet. However, it cannot be included in the total square footage because the 5 feet, because it doesn't begin at the floor level. So if it was actually from the floor, and let's say it had a 5 feet height, it could be included. But since it doesn't start at the floor directly, it cannot. And the last principle, but not least, very important, it is telling us to exclude open areas that have no floor, such as vaulted areas or open to below areas. So here is an example of it. So we see here 2 examples of a floor plan. On the left-hand side, we see just a floor, just a room, and we can see that there are stairs, but these stairs are included in total square footage because the area of the stairwell opening equals to the area of the stair treads. So there is no extra open area to exclude from upper floor measurements. However, on the right-hand side, we see that there is open to below area. So this open area is actually greater than the area of the treads. This area is basically, this area cannot be included in total square footage. Here is another example of it. So we see, basement obviously is below grade, we don't include it. Then we see a first level, fully included. And then we see a second level, an open area. So you can still measure the open area, but you have to exclude it from the total calculations. And this is the reason, coming back to our original conversation, about exterior square footage, sometimes measurement professionals would measure from outside the building. So they'll actually go outside the building and measure from the wall. That's not accurate way to measure it. We recommend to measure from inside, from perimeter of the wall, and then just separately include the wall thickness. Why? Because of situations like this. There are houses with open areas. You cannot include the square footage, but if you just measure from outside, you can't really see what's going on inside. And this is the reason why sometimes we have people asking, hey, so you provided us the square footage and it's different from what we had for in tax records. This is why tax records quite often are not accurate, because it's very unclear how they measure properties for tax records. Based on what I heard is that sometimes they would actually measure from outside. So for example, they would just stand outside the building, measure it from outside, the first level, they will just measure from outside, and then just, let's say, multiply by 2 if there are 2 floors, or multiply by 3 if there are 3 levels. So obviously they're not considering for open areas or for wall thicknesses or for ceiling heights. So this is the reason why sometimes, or quite often, from our practice, pretty much every single time, our measurements or professional measurements would differ from measurements indicated on the tax records. And that's why there are sometimes we hear disputes between home buyers, sellers, and realtors on the improperly reported square footage, because let's say home seller or real estate agent were using measurements from tax records and they were wrong. It turned out that they were wrong. Then there are disputes. It's something you want to avoid, basically. So we don't recommend using tax record data for your listings to avoid any problems. So these are basically the 9 principles of residential measurement standard. Another thing I guess I would add is that structures that are not connected to the residence, such as garages, are calculated separately and they're not included. So for example, if you have detached garage, you do not include the measurement of it in total square footage. You can just indicate it separately, just like you would do for the low grade proper spaces. So this pretty much concludes my presentation. Let's see, I don't see any more questions. Thank you very much for joining us today. And like I said, we will share the recording. Have a great day.